A 7-foot, one giant timidly walked into a 24-hour print shop at 1:47 a.m. in Baton Rouge. That was Shaquille O'Neal, an NBA star with 4 championships and hundreds of millions of dollars. He only wanted to save a corrupted business file on his USB drive for an early morning meeting. The night shift student owed $6,800 in tuition. But he still spent 90 minutes using his own software to restore the file and help Shaq. The next morning, the store fired him immediately for breaking data security rules. The student's sudden disappearance forced Shaq to start a quiet search in Baton Rouge. Now, the student's bank account was completely empty. His tuition deadline was down to hours. Yet, cold office rules blocked every clue, leaving Shaq at a dead end. Can a billionaire's quiet reward find him in time? Or will the college doors slam shut on this kind young man? The sun came up fast over Baton Rouge that morning. It rose over wide streets, sleepy gas stations, and tired storefronts. Shaq's pitch meeting at 7 a.m. went perfectly. His investors loved the clean numbers glowing on his laptop screen. None of them knew a tired stranger had saved that file just hours earlier. None of them knew his name was Julian. By 10:30 a.m., Shaq drove back to the print shop himself. He wanted to thank the young man properly this time. He had folded a thick stack of cash inside his jacket pocket. He planned to hand it over with a quiet smile and a few simple words. He parked outside and looked at the building for a second. The same flickering sign still buzzed above the glass door. He stepped inside, ducking his head under the low frame. The smell of fresh ink and old coffee greeted him again. But the face behind the counter was not the one he remembered. A new clerk stood there, young and clearly nervous. Shaq asked for the young man from the night before. The new clerk just shrugged and quickly called for the manager. Arthur stepped out from the back office a moment later. He wiped his hands on his apron and looked Shaq over slowly. His voice stayed flat and businesslike the whole time. He said the night clerk no longer worked there at all. Shaq asked when that happened and why it happened so fast. Arthur said it happened at exactly 6 a.m. that morning. The reason was a violation of company data security rules. He said the boy had used outside software on a store computer. Shaq felt his chest tighten with quiet disbelief. The shop's ceiling forced him to bend his neck low. He had to duck under a hanging light fixture near the counter. His huge frame felt completely out of place inside that tiny store. He tried to keep his voice calm and steady. Anger sat heavy in his throat, but he held it back firmly. He remembered his mother's old warning about scaring people without meaning to. So he stayed quiet and let his eyes do most of the talking. For a moment, nobody in the shop said anything at all. The hum of the printers filled the silence between them. Shaq studied Arthur's face, searching for any trace of regret. He found none, only a man following rules without thinking twice. The contrast hit him harder than any argument ever could. One young man had risked his job to help a total stranger. Now that same kindness had cost him everything he had built. Shaq stood in the doorway and said nothing for a long moment. He thought about how easily good things got punished in this world. A simple act of trust had turned into a sudden pink slip. The print shop smelled like fresh ink and burnt coffee grounds. None of that mattered now, only the empty space behind the counter. He glanced once more at the spot where the young man had sat working quietly. A worn office chair, a dusty keyboard, a small lamp left on still. Nothing about the scene looked dramatic or special in any obvious way. Yet something important had clearly happened right there only hours earlier that morning. A delivery truck rumbled past outside, rattling the front windows slightly. Arthur went back to stacking paper near the register, unbothered. Life inside the shop continued exactly as it always had before. Shaq found that the most unsettling part of the whole morning. Shaq asked one simple question before stepping back outside. How could saving someone's morning meeting destroy a person's entire future? No one in the shop had a real answer for him. He walked out into the bright Louisiana sun, his jaw still tight. Inside the car, Shaq sat still for a long minute. He needed to find the boy and make this right somehow. He decided this would not end with him simply driving away. Some debts could never be paid back with cash alone. He turned the key, but did not start the engine right away. His mind drifted back to one detail from the night before. The young man had never once asked for anything in return. That kind of quiet pride was rare and impossible to forget. He remembered the boy's tired eyes and the careful way he worked. No complaints, no excuses, just steady hands moving across a broken keyboard. Shaq finally pulled the car door shut and called his assistant. He needed real information now, not vague guesses or empty excuses. Marcus answered on the second ring, already alert despite the early hour. Shaq explained everything quickly, his voice low and controlled. Marcus promised to start digging into the shop's ownership records right away. Shaq thanked him and sat back, watching the storefront through tinted glass. He walked back inside one more time before finally leaving the lot. He asked Arthur directly for the young man's contact information. Arthur folded his arms and shook his head firmly. He cited company privacy policy as his only answer. Arthur added a careless comment about night workers being easy to replace. His tone stayed smooth, almost bored, like this happened every single week. Shaq felt his pulse jump, but kept his hands relaxed. He had learned long ago that yelling never solved real problems. He thought of his old philosophy from years spent on the court. Respond, do not react, no matter how unfair things felt inside. Money and fame could crush a small business owner instantly, but that kind of power often destroyed more than it ever fixed. Shaq chose silence instead of pressure, threats, or his famous name. He turned and walked slowly toward the front door. Before leaving, he noticed a second cashier watching him closely from the corner. Her eyes carried something close to fear and guilt mixed together. He slipped a folded napkin across the counter toward her quietly. On it, he had written his assistant Marcus's phone number. He said nothing else, just a quiet nod and a steady look. She tucked the napkin into her apron pocket fast and looked away. Shaq stepped outside, feeling the weight of helplessness for the first time in years. His money could buy almost anything except the one thing he needed most. He could not force the truth out of frightened, underpaid employees. He could only hope someone inside that shop had real courage. He sat in his car outside the shop for a while longer. The street buzzed with morning traffic and rattling delivery trucks. He stared at the shop's faded sign and felt strangely small. Wealth meant nothing if it could not undo one bad morning. He wondered if anyone in that building would risk their job for a stranger. Speaking up could mean losing everything, just like the boy did. Fear had a strong grip on ordinary working people everywhere in this city. Shaq finally drove off, leaving the question hanging in the thick, humid air. Across town, in a room barely 15 feet wide, Julian sat alone. He stared at his phone screen under a flickering ceiling lamp. His bank account showed exactly $17.42. His rent notice glowed bright red, demanding $1,200 overdue. A university portal alert blinked at the bottom of his screen too. Tuition of $6,800 was due in 9 days. Julian did not cry or throw anything in frustration. He simply closed the laptop and folded his thin blanket carefully. He packed his few belongings into a worn duffel bag slowly. Nothing inside that bag mattered much beyond clothes, a charger, and old textbooks. He checked the clock on the wall and saw it was almost 4. A heavy lifting shift waited for him across town that afternoon. Julian's pride ran deeper than most people his age could imagine. His roommate offered him $100 the night before quietly. Julian refused, knowing his friend lived on instant noodles most weeks. He never wanted pity, only a fair chance to work hard. He pulled on his scuffed work boots and tied them tight. Each lace pull felt like another small act of stubborn discipline. His shoulders already ached from yesterday's shift at the warehouse downtown. Still, he walked out the door without a single word of complaint. The afternoon heat outside felt brutal and completely unforgiving on his skin. Sweat soaked through his shirt before he even reached the bus stop corner. He carried heavy boxes for hours, his muscles screaming the entire time. A fresh bruise bloomed dark purple across his shoulder by sunset. He moved like a man twice his age by the final hour. His hands trembled slightly each time he set a box down. Still, he never slowed his pace or asked for an extra break. The foreman barely noticed him at all, just another tired pair of hands. Julian never once mentioned his pain to co-workers standing nearby. He believed complaining solved nothing and only invited more trouble his way. His silence was not weakness, but a kind of armor built over years. He had learned this lesson early, growing up with very little around him. When his shift finally ended, he walked instead of taking the bus. The extra $2 mattered more to him than tired legs did. Streetlights flickered on one by one as the sky turned orange. He counted his steps sometimes, just to keep his mind from wandering. Back in his small room, he ate a plain sandwich standing up. He did not bother turning on the television or playing music. Silence felt easier to manage than noise on nights like this. He set his alarm for 5 and fell asleep within minutes. Back across the city, Marcus picked up an unexpected call that evening. The cashier from the print shop spoke fast and clearly nervous. She gave him the name of the company that owned several local print shops. The regional director's name was Vance, a man known for strict, rigid rules. She also mentioned, in a whisper, that everyone feared losing their job. Speaking to Marcus already felt like a small act of bravery. Marcus thanked her gently and promised her name would stay private forever. She hung up quickly before anyone in the break room noticed. Marcus relayed everything to Shaq within the hour, word for word. Shaq decided a face-to-face meeting was the only real option left. He scheduled an appointment at a glossy downtown office tower the next day. Vance agreed to meet, expecting just another routine business visit. Before the meeting, Marcus pulled together everything he could find about Vance himself. He learned the man had run that regional office for nearly a decade. Employees rarely spoke up against him, fearing quick and quiet retaliation. Marcus shared this background with Shaq during the short car ride downtown. Shaq listened closely, but did not let it change his calm approach. He believed every person deserved a fair chance to do right. Still, he prepared himself for a difficult, careful conversation ahead. The elevator ride up to the top floor felt unusually long and quiet. Vance greeted Shaq with practiced politeness and a firm, confident handshake. His office smelled like fresh paint and expensive cologne mixed together. When Shaq mentioned Julian's situation, Vance's smile tightened almost instantly. He pulled out employee contracts like a wall of careful armor. He spoke calmly about standard procedures and strict company policy guidelines. Every sentence sounded smooth, polite, and almost impossible to argue against. Shaq noticed how easily Vance hid behind paperwork and rigid corporate rules. Real people seemed to disappear inside Vance's careful, distant language. Shaq did not raise his voice or mention his fame once. He simply asked Vance what dignity meant inside his company walls. Vance blinked, clearly unprepared for such a direct and quiet question. The room grew silent except for the steady hum of the air conditioner. Vance tried again, listing more rules about strict data protection standards. Shaq listened patiently, his massive hands resting calmly on his knees. He let the silence stretch longer than most people could ever handle. Vance's confidence started cracking just slightly around the edges of his words. A long pause filled the room, heavy and uncomfortable for one of them. Shaq did not rush to fill it with more words. He simply watched Vance shift in his expensive leather chair. The silence said more than any threat ever could. Vance cleared his throat and reached for a glass of water nearby. His hand shook slightly as he lifted it to his lips. Shaq noticed, but said nothing, letting the moment stretch even longer. Outside the window, traffic moved silently far below the glass tower. While they talked, Marcus's phone buzzed quietly with a new message. The cashier had secretly sent a photo of Julian's personnel file. It included his home address and a short employment history note. Marcus read it quickly, careful not to interrupt the tense meeting. At the same moment, Vance's eyes drifted toward a magazine resting on his desk. The cover showed Shaquille O'Neal's net worth and his statewide business influence. His jaw dropped slightly as recognition finally settled in fully. The confident mask on his face crumbled almost instantly after that. Vance's posture changed. Within seconds, his shoulders slumping forward weakly. His polite tone turned shaky and apologetic almost immediately after. He stammered something about reviewing the termination decision personally and quickly. Shaq did not gloat or even raise an eyebrow at the shift. He simply let out a quiet breath and stood up slowly. Power, real power, never needed to shout to be felt deeply. Marcus handed him the small slip of paper with Julian's address. Shaq thanked Vance politely and walked out, without another single word. Outside, Marcus asked how Shaq planned to approach Julian directly now. A man with that much pride would not accept easy, public charity. Shaq stayed quiet for a moment, thinking the problem through carefully. Helping the wrong way could feel like another insult to Julian's pride. That evening, Shaq had Marcus drive him near a busy construction site. Julian worked there now, carrying heavy bags of cement under the brutal sun. Temperatures climbed past 100 degrees across the work site that entire afternoon. Shaq watched from inside a parked SUV with dark, tinted windows. He saw Julian stumble under a heavy bag and fall hard onto the gravel. His knee scraped against loose rocks, drawing a thin line of blood. Julian gritted his teeth and stood back up, without hesitation or complaint. He kept working, as if nothing painful had happened to him at all. Shaq's hand moved toward the door handle, ready to step out immediately. He wanted to hand Julian cash right then and there, simply, but his hand stopped just before touching the cold metal handle. Something inside him pulled back from that simple, easy plan. He remembered his stepfather, Philip Harrison, and an old lesson from childhood years ago. Help given the wrong way could feel like an insult to a man. Pride mattered just as much as money to people like Julian. Shaq decided he needed a smarter, gentler plan instead of cash. He thought about his own years growing up poor in Newark. Money alone never fixed the deeper wounds of poverty and quiet shame. He wanted Julian to feel earned success, not pity from a passing stranger. The plan had to protect every single ounce of Julian's dignity. He sat in that parked car for almost 30 more minutes. He watched Julian finish his shift and walk slowly toward the bus stop. No one offered him water, no one asked if he was okay. The world simply moved on around him, indifferent and busy. Marcus sat quietly in the driver's seat, watching Shaq's face the whole time. He had never seen his boss this still and thoughtful before. Shaq finally spoke, saying only that some people carried too much alone. Marcus nodded and started the engine, without asking any further questions. They drove back toward the office in near total silence that evening. Streetlights blurred past the windows as the city slowly settled into night. Shaq stared out at the passing buildings, his mind already forming a plan. By the time they arrived, he knew exactly what he needed to do. Days passed quickly, each one heavier than the last for Julian. By the 8th day, he had saved only $412.50. His old laptop crashed completely after months of non-stop, exhausting overuse. That laptop held his entire graduation thesis, unfinished and completely unsaved. He sat in the university library at 11 o'clock that night. The countdown clock on the tuition portal read 24 hours remaining exactly. He applied for an emergency student loan through the school's online system. The automated system rejected him instantly for lacking a financial guarantor. Julian stared at the rejection message, without blinking for a long while. He felt the cold, mechanical nature of the system crushing him slowly. A brilliant student could fail simply because of one missing number on a form. He closed his laptop and rubbed his tired, burning eyes. The library felt unusually quiet around him, almost completely lifeless tonight. Other students packed up their bags and walked toward the glowing exits. Julian stayed seated, staring at nothing in particular for a long moment. He wondered if his belief in basic kindness was finally running out. He thought about the giant man from the print shop briefly again. That stranger had thanked him kindly, before everything fell apart completely. Julian wondered if good deeds simply led to worse outcomes most of the time. Still, some quiet part of him refused to fully give up hope. He glanced once more at his phone, half expecting another rejection notice. Nothing came, just silence and the soft hum of the library lights. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed slowly. Tomorrow felt like a cliff he could not see past. A librarian walked by, quietly turning off lights near the far wall. She glanced at Julian, but said nothing, leaving him to his thoughts. He gathered his bag and stepped out into the warm night air. The campus felt empty, almost ghostly, under the dim parking lot lights. He walked back to his dorm slowly, counting cracks in the sidewalk. Each step felt heavier than the last one before it. He thought about calling his mother, but decided against worrying her further. Some burdens, he believed, were his alone to carry quietly. Meanwhile, Shaq visited the university's finance office early the next morning. He met with Eleanor, the head of student financial services there. He explained, briefly, that he wanted to help one specific student quietly. He did not want his name attached publicly to the gift at all. Eleanor offered to simply write off Julian's remaining tuition balance directly. Shaq shook his head and proposed something more thoughtful instead. He wanted to create a small emergency scholarship fund immediately that morning. Its name would be the Apex Community Leadership Scholarship. He carefully described eligibility requirements that matched Julian's exact situation closely. Late-night work hours, financial hardship, and strong academic performance were the key factors. Only one student on the entire campus would qualify under those specific terms. Eleanor listened, clearly moved by his careful and quiet attention to detail. Shaq leaned forward and spoke one final, clear instruction to her. Never mention his name to Julian under any circumstance at all. Tell him only that he earned this through hard work and honesty. Eleanor nodded, promising to handle every detail with complete discretion herself. She worried briefly about how fast the paperwork needed to move now. The automatic tuition lockout would trigger early the very next morning. Every signature and approval had to happen before sunrise without fail. She promised Shaq she would push the entire process personally overnight. Eleanor spent the rest of that day on the phone with different departments. She called the registrar, the financial aid board, and the system administrator. Each call brought her one small step closer to finishing in time. By late evening, only one final digital signature remained outstanding. She stayed at her desk long, after other staff had gone home. The office grew quiet except for the soft click of her keyboard. Around midnight, the last approval finally came through the system. She allowed herself a tired, relieved smile before turning off her lamp. Shaq thanked her quietly and stood to leave her small office. Before walking out, he paused at the door for a second. He said simply, that kindness should never need a name attached to it. Eleanor watched him go, still holding the folder full of new paperwork. The next day arrived heavy, with tension for everyone involved in this. It was the 10th day since Julian had lost his job. At exactly 3:15 p.m., Julian sat quietly packing boxes in his small dorm room. He expected an email confirming his academic suspension any minute now. His phone buzzed once, with a soft, familiar notification sound. He opened it, bracing himself for more disappointing news again. Instead, the screen showed something completely unexpected and deeply confusing. His account balance read 0, with a scholarship payment applied in full. Julian read the message twice, unsure if his tired eyes were playing tricks. The words said the Apex scholarship had covered his tuition completely. He dropped the box he was holding and ran toward the office fast. His sneakers slapped loudly against the quiet hallway floor below him. He burst into Eleanor's office, breathless and wide-eyed, with total disbelief. Tears slid down his face before he could even speak clearly. Eleanor smiled gently and confirmed the payment had processed successfully that afternoon. Julian asked again and again who had created this scholarship just for him. Eleanor kept her promise and gave him no specific name at all. She only said a kind soul believed in late-night workers exactly like him, someone who valued people willing to help others at 1 a.m. Julian sat down slowly, overwhelmed by relief and confusion mixed together. He thanked Eleanor repeatedly, his voice shaking, with raw, honest emotion. She handed him a tissue and let him sit quietly for a long moment. Outside her window, sunlight spilled gently across the quiet campus lawn. For the first time in days, Julian allowed himself to breathe easily again. He walked back to his dorm room in a daze that afternoon. The hallway looked exactly the same, but everything felt different now somehow. He sat on his bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Gratitude and curiosity mixed together inside his exhausted, racing chest. He needed to know who had saved him from total, certain collapse. The mystery felt almost as powerful as the relief itself right then. He promised himself he would find a way to say thank you properly. Somehow, somewhere, he would repay this unexpected and life-changing kindness. That night, he lay awake longer than usual, replaying the strange week. The print shop, the firing, the heavy bags of cement, the rejection. Then this sudden, quiet miracle arriving at exactly the right moment. None of it made sense yet, but he felt lighter than he had in weeks. Weeks later, graduation day finally arrived under a clear, bright blue sky. Julian walked across the stage as the top student in his class. His name echoed through the speakers, followed by loud applause from the crowd. He clutched his diploma tightly, still thinking about the mystery scholarship. In the days before the ceremony, Julian had searched everywhere for real answers. He checked websites and forums mentioning the Apex Scholarship by name carefully. He found almost nothing except one small office address listed in Atlanta. Curiosity pulled at him every single day since that rejection scare. He decided to write a handwritten letter to that Atlanta address himself. In it, he explained his deep gratitude and his promise to repay every cent. He sealed the envelope carefully and mailed it the very next morning. He had no real idea if it would ever reach the right person. He thought about that letter often in the weeks that followed. Had it even arrived, or was it sitting in some forgotten mailroom? Still, writing it had felt important, like closing one small chapter properly. He moved forward with his life, carrying that small hope quietly. After the ceremony, Julian returned to the administration office to collect his file. Inside the folder sat a sleek black envelope, completely unexpected and out of place. It had no stamp and no return address printed anywhere on it. Only a small embossed mark shaped like a size 23 shoe appeared there. Julian opened it slowly, his hands trembling slightly, with growing anticipation. Inside was a short handwritten note, simple and direct in tone. It read that he did not owe anyone $6,800 at all. He had already paid that debt with 90 minutes of kindness at 1 in the morning. The note asked him to visit O'Neal Enterprises in Atlanta the following Monday. It mentioned a desk waiting just for him there already. Julian stared at the page, frozen, his mind racing through old memories quickly. Slowly, the identity of that gentle giant from the print shop became clear. He remembered the careful way that man had ducked under the doorway frame. He remembered the quiet patience, never once raising his voice that night. Everything fit together now, every small detail from that strange, late night. Warmth spread through his chest as understanding finally settled completely inside him. He sat down on the office steps and read the letter again. Tears welled up, but this time, from pure gratitude alone now. He thought about how that quiet act of kindness had traveled so far. A small favor in the night had returned as a true lifeline. He folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his jacket pocket. He walked outside, into the warm afternoon air, feeling completely different now. The campus looked the same, but his whole world had quietly shifted. He could not stop smiling the entire walk back home. That night, he called his roommate just to share the strange news. His roommate listened in stunned silence, then laughed with pure joy. They sat on the floor of their tiny room, talking until late. For once, the future felt open instead of locked tight and hopeless. The following Monday, Julian arrived at the O'Neal Enterprises building in Atlanta. The lobby felt vast, polished, and slightly intimidating at first glance. A receptionist guided him calmly toward the top-floor executive office upstairs. His heart pounded harder with every single step down that long hallway. Inside, Shaq sat behind a large wooden desk near tall glass windows. He stood up slowly and bent down to shake Julian's hand warmly. There were no grand speeches or mentions of money or fame between them. Shaq simply said Julian had saved his work, and he returned the favor. Julian struggled to find the right words for that strange, emotional moment. He finally managed a quiet thank you, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. Shaq smiled and gestured toward a desk near the window calmly. It already had Julian's name printed neatly on a small brass plate. For a moment, neither man spoke, letting the quiet settle between them. Sunlight from the tall windows fell softly across the polished office floor. Outside, the city of Atlanta hummed quietly far below them. It felt, for both men, like a long chapter finally closing gently. Julian ran his fingers slowly across the nameplate, still not quite believing any of it. Shaq told him simply to show up Monday morning, ready to learn everything. No long speech followed, just a firm handshake and a quiet, steady nod. Julian left that office feeling like his entire life had finally turned a real corner. He called his mother, that same night, his voice full of joy. He told her everything, the print shop, the scholarship, the letter, the desk. She cried on the phone, proud beyond words of her hard-working son. For the first time in months, Julian slept soundly through the entire night. Over the following weeks, Julian learned the rhythm of his new office quickly. He arrived early every morning, often before anyone else showed up. Coworkers noticed his quiet discipline and steady, careful attention to detail. Slowly, the same pride that once isolated him began earning him real respect. 1 year later, Julian stood confidently before the company's full board of directors. He had grown into a skilled and respected financial analyst within the firm. He proposed a new initiative called the 1 a.m. Fund for the board's approval. It offered paid internships and scholarships for night shift students across Louisiana. He explained how exhausted, proud workers often slipped through every safety net available. People who quietly helped others deserved real, lasting support in return for that. The board listened carefully, impressed by his clear plan and genuine passion. Shaq sat at the head of the table, nodding with a quiet smile. Julian spoke about his own $17.42 from that hard week. He spoke about the bruised shoulder and the rejected loan application too. He wanted no other student to feel that same crushing helplessness alone. The room stayed silent, every board member listening closely to every word. The fund received full approval before the meeting even officially ended that day. Julian's quiet courage had become something far bigger than himself now. A single act of kindness near a humming printer had multiplied many times over. It now supported dozens of hard-working students just like him across the state. After the meeting, Shaq stayed behind, while the others filed out slowly. He walked over to Julian and patted his shoulder once, firmly. Neither man said much, just a shared look of quiet understanding between two men. Some things, they both knew, never needed loud words to matter at all. Julian returned to his new desk that afternoon, still buzzing with quiet energy. He thought about the print shop, the cement bags, the empty bank account balance. None of that defined him anymore, only the path he had chosen since then. He opened his laptop and got back to work without any delay. The story closed, without any revenge against anyone who had wronged Julian. No public confrontation, no headlines, no dramatic punishment for Arthur or Vance. Instead, it ended with one simple, lasting truth carried forward instead. Kindness given quietly often returns in ways no one ever expects. A person's true worth is never measured by rigid rules or cold systems. It is measured by patience, respect, and quiet acts of care for others. Julian learned this lesson the hard way, through hunger and deep uncertainty. Shaq had known it for years, since his own childhood in Newark. Years from now, Julian would likely tell this story to someone else. Maybe a tired student, maybe a co-worker having a hard week. He would talk about a giant man who ducked under a doorway once. He would talk about kindness that traveled farther than anyone expected it to ever travel. Somewhere in Baton Rouge, that same print shop still runs its night shifts today. New employees come and go, mostly unaware of what once happened there. But one folded napkin, one quiet phone call, changed 2 lives forever after. Sometimes the smallest act at 1 in the morning becomes the loudest gift of all. This story is a work of fiction inspired by values of kindness and resilience. Names, places, and events were created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real situations is purely coincidental and unintended. Written with care by a human storyteller who believes quiet kindness still matters today.